And then moving along, we have Charles Darwin, who is a very fascinating character indeed, and quite the center of much controversy, to say the least, because of his theory of evolution and the tension that exists between creationism and evolution, which is an ongoing battle today. Charles Robert Darwin was born in 1809, and he lived until 1882. He was born in Shrewsbury, England. He was the son of a physician. As a naturalist, he won sponsors and government backing for an expedition on the military sailing ship, the HMS Beagle, where he made his famous observations on the differences in finches on the island, the Galapagos Islands in South America. He later used all that information that he had gathered to support his theory of evolution. It should be noted that he was not the first to come up with a theory of evolution. There was some other scientists that had come up with these ideas. He wasn't alone in that, but he did, in fact, have the loudest voice. He's most famous for his work on the origin of species in 1859, in which he suggested in the last lines of the first edition that while this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, therein life with its several powers have been originally breathed by the Creator into a few forms, or into one from so simple a beginning, endless forms most beautiful and most wonderful have been and are being evolved. It's interesting because Darwin didn't shy away from that there was a God. And so, I think at the end of the day, we would consider him to be a kind of agnostic theist, necessarily leaning way far the other direction from organized religion. On page 520 of The Origin of Species, he also has a very interesting statement that he makes where he says outright, I see no good reason why the views given in this volume should shock the religious feelings of anyone. It is satisfactory, as showing how transient such impressions are, to remember that the greatest discovery ever made by man, namely the law of the attraction of gravity, was also attacked by, and he names a guy. But he goes on to say, a celebrated author and divine, someone that was popular in his day, went on to say that they had accepted the idea of evolution as a just and noble conception of the deity. To believe that God would create a few original forms capable of self-development in other and needful forms, as to believe that God required a fresh act of creation to supply the voids caused by the action of his laws. And so there's kind of this ongoing kind of woven into the text, this idea that God was, a real concept, that there was in fact a creator. And it wasn't necessarily, I guess Darwin's major point of contention would have been found in his disagreement with Christianity and his rejection of the Old Testament, and the criticism that it was not historical and things of that nature. And to this day, Darwin, when just to even say the name Darwin, invokes quite a bit of hostility at times in certain circles, and but we cannot deny that Darwin himself actually rejected Christianity. He rejected religion, and a lot of some scholars believe that was due to the fact that he lost his daughter, and that made him angry with God, and he made some commentary outside of course, his major work, The Origin of Species, but that was to the effect that he was giving up on this idea of God because he thought hell was unjust and things like that. And so I like to bring this topic up in this course because I think that any thoughtful human being should be able to look at this topic and at least be able to talk about it in a civil manner. And so we do, I try to bring one of the discussions for this course as try to implement the discussion of, is it possible to believe in God and believe in evolution? And I would say it would probably be impossible to be a biblical literalist, meaning you believe everything in the Bible is to be literally true, exactly what it says, and to be an evolutionist, unless you created some sort of, time-lapse theory that 7 days was 7 trillion years or something for God. That may be one way to reconcile it. But I would definitely say that his plan at the core, the fundamental principles of his theory are in opposition to the literal creation story in Genesis. However, Darwin did not reject that there might be or could be a God, and some people have even gone on to reconcile their belief in God and their belief in evolution. And of course, that's a decision you have to make as a human being. You might reject it all. Who knows? You might reject the whole God thing totally and say, who cares? It's none of my business, whatever. Not worried about it. You might think Darwin was crazy as well, whatever. But I like to, bring us this conversation up in discussion. It is important to acknowledge Darwin. We can't talk about the humanities. We cannot discuss history without acknowledging the key event that is Darwin's theory becoming popular. What he had to say about the origin of species was transformative. It changed the course of the world. It was a kind of reformation in thinking. If we thought that what took place in the 1500s concerning our understanding or humankind's understanding of the world, there's no way in the world we could even begin to neglect the way Darwin's theory changed the world, at least the way God was conceived, or even the human beings and the elevation of our status. And I think that's one of the main points of contention for creationists and theists and believers, or whatever you want to call them, is that if humankind is just one more species of mammal, some other animal, that we're not any more elevated intellectually, or that we don't have a soul or anything greater than what we see on the surface in the material world, and we're just as comparable to the dog down the street or a horse. People could begin to say, I could see why people would find that problematic for their worldview, because they would want to believe that they're as human beings, they're important, because God created them and made them special and in his image. And so I totally can understand the argument for sure the creationists hold.